The crowd in King's Landing was roaring. People were shouting, throwing things, and waiting for blood. On the steps of the great sept, Eddard Stark, once Hand of the King, was on his knees. His long hair fell around his face, dirty and soaked in sweat. The sword of the executioner, Ice, the very sword that once belonged to Ned, was raised high in the air. Joffrey sat on the Iron Throne, like he was some kind of god, smirking like a spoiled child who had never faced real fear. Sansa was crying, begging for mercy. The scepter held her back. Ned looked up at the sky, silent. He had already confessed to a crime he didn't commit, just to protect his daughters. He thought he was doing the right thing. He thought they would send him to the wall. But Joffrey, in his madness and hunger for power, shouted, "Bring me his head!" Everything froze for a second. The crowd gasped. Even Cersei's eyes widened. She had not expected that. Neither did Varys or Littlefinger. But it was too late. The executioner began to swing the blade. That's when the chaos began. A loud sound exploded from the city gates. Boom! The ground shook. Ravens flew from the rooftops. Everyone turned to look. Horns blew. Northern horns, and not just a few. Hundreds. Out of nowhere, a storm of arrows flew over the walls, hitting the Lannister guards near the sept. Screams followed. The gold cloaks panicked. People ran in all directions. Then came the riders, tall men with fur cloaks and stark banners flying high. Leading them was a young man with a hard face, blue eyes burning with rage, and a direwolf running beside his horse, Robb Stark. He didn't come with a small army. He brought nearly 10,000 Northmen, hidden in the woods outside the city, for 2 nights. No one had seen them coming. Ned raised his head as the sound of horses thundered through the square. His eyes widened. He thought he was dreaming. But there was his son, the boy who left Winterfell as a teenager, now riding into King's Landing like a warrior prince. "Stop this madness!" Robb shouted, his voice echoing across the square. The executioner hesitated, unsure of what to do. Then a direwolf leapt at him, grey wind, tearing into his arm and knocking the sword aside. The giant blade crashed to the ground beside Ned, harmless. Guards tried to stop Robb, but the Northmen had already taken control of the square. Lannister soldiers fell one by one. Archers shot from the rooftops. Crows circled above like they could already smell death. Joffrey stood up, scared for the first time in his life. "Mother," he cried. Cersei tried to pull him back, but it was too late. The crowd was out of control. The small folk ran, hiding in the alleys. The scepter had vanished with Sansa. Robb jumped off his horse and ran to his father. "Father," he said, breathing hard. "You're not dying today." Ned couldn't speak. He just nodded, eyes full of tears. He hadn't cried since he was a boy. Behind Robb came the Great John, Rose Bolton, and other northern lords. They formed a wall around Ned, protecting him. "You fools have done enough damage," Robb shouted toward the throne. "This is not justice. This is murder." Cersei screamed at the guards, but they were too few and too shaken. Joffrey tried to act brave, but his voice trembled. "Kill them! Kill the traitors!" But no one moved. Instead, the Lannister soldiers slowly dropped their swords. The crown was no longer in control. The people saw what Robb did, and they remembered the honor of Ned Stark. Ned was carried away, injured but alive, surrounded by northern steel. The square was left in flames. The Iron Throne still stood. But for the first time, the Lannisters knew they were not untouchable anymore. The War of the Five Kings had taken a new turn. The ride out of King's Landing was madness. Smoke rose behind them as fires caught in the chaos. Screams echoed from alleyways as common folk looted stores, kicked down doors, and ran wild through the streets. The city had been on the edge for weeks. Robb's sudden attack had pushed it over. Robb rode at the front, eyes cold and focused, grey wind beside him, snarling at anyone who came too close. Ned, weakened and bleeding, lay slumped on a horse, held upright by Lord Glover. The Northmen surrounded them tightly, forming a moving wall of steel and fury. They didn't speak. They just rode. It wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Behind them, the Lannisters would regroup. They still held the Red Keep. Cersei, Jaime, and that little monster Joffrey weren't dead yet. But Robb didn't care about killing them now. He had what he came for, his father. They set up camp a few miles from the city, deep in the Kingswood. Maester Lewin tended to Ned immediately, stitching his wounds and applying herbs to his bruises. His head had been cut in the panic, and he'd lost some blood, but he was alive. That was what mattered. Robb stood outside the tent, looking toward the faint orange glow of King's Landing in the distance. Rose Bolton approached silently, as he always did. "That city will burn before it bends," he said in his calm, quiet voice. "You've won a battle, my lord." "Not the war." Robb didn't look at him. "Let them burn it, then. The Lannisters will respond quickly. Tywin won't take this lightly." Robb finally turned. "I know. That's why we leave before dawn." Rose narrowed his eyes. "And go where?" "To Riverrun." Robb clenched his fists. "We have what we came for. We saved my father. Now we bring the fight to them properly. I'll gather the River Lords. I'll call every bannerman that still remembers what honor is. Let the Lannisters come. This time we'll be ready." That night, in the quiet of the woods, Ned Stark woke fully for the first time. He sat up slowly, groaning at the pain in his ribs. Robb was at his side immediately. "You should rest," Robb said, voice low. Ned looked at him for a long moment, eyes full of pride, grief, and something else, fear. "You shouldn't have come. You were going to die," Robb replied, his voice shaking for the first time in days. "I told you to keep the North safe." "And I will," Robb said. "But not without you." Ned closed his eyes. "You've started a war." Robb didn't argue. He just nodded. "And I'll finish it." For a while they said nothing. Just sat in the silence, father and son, no longer lord and boy, now soldiers in a war neither of them had asked for. But in King's Landing, the silence didn't last long. In the Red Keep, Cersei screamed at the council, "You let them take him! You let the North ride into our city and humiliate us!" Joffrey sat on the throne, pale and shaken. He tried to speak like a king, but his voice kept cracking. "We'll kill them all! We'll bring their heads to the gates." Varys was quiet. Littlefinger smirked. Rhaegal coughed. It was Tywin who made his presence known. Not in the room, but by Raven. His letter arrived that night. It said only one thing: "March, crush the wolf. Bring me his head." Far to the west, Tywin Lannister's armies began to gather, but the war was no longer simple. Across the narrow sea, whispers spread. The Starks had struck King's Landing. In dawn, Prince Doran listened carefully. In the Vale, Lord Robin's advisers reconsidered their loyalty, and in Dragonstone, Stannis Baratheon read the letter and burned it, then stared into the flames. "He's not the only wolf," he said quietly. "And fire will answer fire." Back in the north at Winterfell, young Bran Stark had dreams. Dreams of wolves howling in darkness, of ravens crying blood, of his father's voice calling his name from far away. Something was changing. The world was shifting. The South thought the North would kneel, but the North remembered. It remembered every insult, every loss, every Stark buried in cold earth. Now it was awake and it was angry. By the time dawn touched the horizon, the Northmen had already left the woods. Robb Stark led the march through the Riverlands with cold silence, his father's weakened form riding beside him in a covered wagon. The rescue had changed everything, not just for Robb, but for the entire realm. The young wolf was no longer just a rebellious lord's son. He was now the man who defied the crown and walked away with his father alive. But in Westeros, no good deed went unpunished. At Casterly Rock, Tywin Lannister stood overlooking the sea, stone-faced and still. The old lion had received the news in the middle of the night. His son Jaime stood beside him, clad in full armor, his sword at his hip. "He made us look like fools," Jaime muttered. "He made you look like fools," Tywin corrected sharply. "Because you were in King's Landing. You allowed a pack of northern dogs to storm the capital and humiliate our family. I wasn't even there. That's the problem." "You were supposed to be." Tywin's jaw tightened. "No Stark walks into our house, spits on our crown, and rides away. This will not stand. What will you do?" "I'm not going to do anything," Tywin said. "I'm going to destroy." He turned toward the council table and unfurled a map. He pointed to the Riverlands. "We begin here. We burn everything that feeds them. Every town, every village. No wheat for the wolves, but there are innocents, there are enemies, Tywin snapped. And if they want to follow the Starks, they will die with them. As Tywin's army moved east, the riverlands turned red. Farms were torched. Children left starving. Ravens brought news of slaughter every day. One by one, smaller houses were crushed under the lion's paw. People began to doubt. Was following Robb Stark worth this cost? But at River Run, Robb had already begun countering the threat. Lord Hoster Tully welcomed him with open arms. The banners of House Tully, Blackwood, Bracken and Mallister were called once more. And with Ned Stark alive and seated beside his son, many hesitant lords changed their minds. The old wolf still breathes, they said. And the young wolf rides beside him. Robb held his war council in the great hall, pacing slowly before the fire. Around the table sat Catelyn, Brynden Blackfish, Rose Bolton, and even a messenger from House Arryn, Lord Jon Royce. If Tywin wants fire, Robb said, we'll give him snow. He pointed at Harrenhal on the map. We strike there. Harrenhal. Royce raised an eyebrow. That place is cursed. Half his men won't even sleep inside the walls. That's why he won't expect it. He'll march through the riverlands, crushing farmers, while we take his stronghold. Brynden nodded. It's bold, dangerous. But if it works, Robb said, we break his spine. The plan was set, but not everyone in the hall supported it. Lady Catelyn pulled Robb aside after the council ended. You've grown cold, she said softly. Robb looked at her. I've grown up. Don't become like them, she warned. Don't lose your heart to win this war. Robb clenched his jaw. My heart doesn't matter. Not if I want to bring us home alive. Back in King's Landing, chaos brewed beneath silk and gold. Joffrey had become paranoid. He no longer sat in court without a sword beside him. He ordered executions for the smallest slights. The small folk whispered that he was cursed. Even the nobles began to murmur. And in the shadows of the Red Keep, Varys moved quietly. He met with a cloaked figure one night in a dark corridor. The game has changed, the figure said. The boy was supposed to die. Now the North has both wolf and whelp, Varys nodded. We underestimated the Stark blood. The figure leaned in. What of the girl? The younger one, Arya. She's gone. Escaped during the riot. The figure smiled. Then perhaps chaos is a ladder. Meanwhile, Arya Stark was alive, hiding in the Riverlands, using a false name, traveling with a small group of outlaws. She had heard whispers of her father's rescue and her brother's war. She swore to herself that day, staring into a fire, blade in hand. I'll find them. I'll kill every Lannister who tried to hurt us. The war was just beginning, but the wolves were no longer alone, and far beyond the wall, in the bitter cold of the true north, something ancient stirred. Eyes like blue fire opened in the darkness. The dead were watching, and they were waiting. The wind blew cold as Robb Stark's army approached the black silhouette of Harrenhal. The castle stood like a dead god, tall, broken, cursed. Its towers melted by dragonfire long ago, still blackened from the time of Aegon, the Conqueror. Even the bravest warriors felt uneasy, riding beneath its walls. Robb stood at the front of his army, grey-wind, pacing beside his horse. His cloak fluttered in the wind. He stared at the castle with narrowed eyes. Rose Bolton rode beside him. Men say ghosts walk there. Robb didn't blink. So let them walk. We're not afraid of ghosts. The young wolf had already sent a smaller scout party days before. The plan was simple. Draw Tywin's attention east, then strike from the west. But Harrenhal was too important to ignore. If they could hold it, there'd be a stone in Tywin's boot, right in the middle of his supply lines. They camped by nightfall, setting up tents outside the ruined gates. The area stank of burnt flesh and rot. As men unpacked, strange bones were found beneath the soil. Some said the place was cursed. Others just wanted to get inside and be done with it. That night, Robb met with Rose, Brynden Tully, and the Great John around a flickering fire. The Lannister scouts spotted us near the Trident, Brynden reported. But they think we're heading south. Let them, Robb said. By the time Tywin hears we've taken Harrenhal, we'll have already turned it into our war camp. But Rouse was watching him closely. The men whisper. My lord, he said. About what? About you. About your choices. Some think you've become too bold, too eager to strike. Robb stared at him. We've done nothing but respond. My father was nearly murdered. They butchered the Riverlands. And the king sits on his throne like a child playing with fire. I should be eager, Rose nodded. Of course. But fire consumes. Something about the way he said it sent a chill down Robb's spine. Inside Harrenhal, they found nothing but death. When they finally broke open the gates, expecting resistance, they discovered only empty halls, skeletons and the smell of decay. The Lannister garrison had fled, or something had made them flee. Dozens of prisoners were found locked in cages, thin, broken, barely alive. Among them was a girl with wild eyes, a boy with burns on his arms, and a quiet man who never spoke but watched everyone like a hawk. Robb had the prisoners released, fed and treated. Take names, he told his captains. Those who can fight will. The rest will be protected. But that night, something strange happened. One of the northern scouts disappeared. His body was found outside the walls, throat cut, eyes wide open, his mouth stuffed with black feathers. The maesters said it was just some mad Lannister loyalist hiding in the ruins, but Robb felt it deep in his bones. Something darker was moving, something not tied to Lannisters or war. Meanwhile, far away, Arya Stark stood in a tavern dressed as a boy, sharpening a blade. She'd heard the rumors. Harrenhal has fallen. Robb Stark now holds it. Her hands trembled as she wrapped her sword in cloth. Almost there, she whispered. Back in Harrenhal, Robb sat in the great hall, now repurposed as a war chamber. His father, still weak, lay nearby giving quiet advice when his voice allowed. The Boltons, Ned warned. Keep your eye on them. Roose plays quiet. But quiet men often think the loudest. Robb nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. He missed home. He missed Bran and Rickon. He wondered where Arya was, if she was still alive. Sansa remained trapped in King's Landing. His heart ached for all of it. He was winning battles, but losing pieces of himself. That night, as he walked the empty halls of Harrenhal alone, Grey Wind suddenly growled. Lo! Warning, Robb froze. A shadow passed near the broken stairs. He drew his sword. Who's there? He called. Silence. Then a voice, cold and soft, whispered from the dark. Winter is not the only thing coming. Robb turned fast, sword raised, but no one was there, just cold air. And the sound of something breathing in the dark. The days passed, but the cold inside Harrenhal never left. No matter how many fires the Northmen lit, the halls remained damp, the stones freezing to the touch. Men said the walls whispered at night. Some claimed to hear crying. Others swore they saw shadows moving where there should be none. Robb Stark didn't believe in ghosts, not until now. Since the night he heard that whisper, sleep had been rare. He kept it quiet, of course. A king couldn't afford to look shaken. But something about Harrenhal felt wrong. It wasn't just the ruin or the smell of old blood. It was something older, deeper, like the castle itself was watching them. Still, he had a war to fight. He moved fast. Within 2 weeks, Harrenhal was turned into a northern fortress. Blacksmiths hammered swords day and night. Messages were sent to the Vale, the Reach, even across the narrow sea. Robb was no longer fighting for just his house. He was declaring a new kingdom. The North would never bow again. But while war was building outside, trouble was growing inside the walls. Roose Bolton had grown quiet again, quieter than usual. He spent his nights with strange letters, always sealing them with his own wax. His men, the Dreadfort soldiers, didn't mix with the other northern lords. They kept to themselves, always watching, always whispering. One of them, a pale man with greasy hair named Locke, had started asking questions. Where does the young wolf keep his maps? How many guards are posted at his tent? Is Ned Stark truly recovered, or just a shadow? It didn't take long before rumors spread. Someone was planning betrayal, and then, just as the tension inside reached its peak, she arrived, Arya. She came through the broken gates with a group of farmers seeking shelter. Dressed in rags, her hair short, face smeared with ash. She looked like just another orphan, but when she saw the Stark banner flying above the towers, Something inside her broke. She dropped to her knees, right there in the mud, and cried, not the soft kind of cry, but the kind that shakes your whole body. A soldier noticed her. "You all right, boy?" "I'm not a boy," she said through gritted teeth. "I'm Arya Stark of Winterfell, and I want to see my brother." They didn't believe her at first, but when she showed them the little iron coin hidden in her boot, and when she repeated the names of her mother, her brothers, and even old Maester Lewin, they brought her inside. Robb was in the middle of a strategy meeting when the door burst open. "My lord," the guard stammered, "there's someone you need to see." And then she walked in, mud-stained, shivering, fierce-eyed Arya. For a moment, Robb couldn't speak. He just stared. Then, without thinking, he stepped forward and wrapped her in his arms. She didn't cry this time, neither did he, but they held each other like the world was ending. Because in some ways, it was. Later that night, Arya sat beside Ned's bed. He was thinner now, still healing, but when he saw her, his lips parted in a slow smile. "I thought you were gone," he whispered. Arya took his hand, her fingers trembling. "I'm not," she said. "I'm here, and I have my list," Ned blinked. "You're what?" But Arya just leaned back. She wouldn't say more. The girl who'd left Winterfell was gone. This one had fire in her bones, but peace never lasted in Harrenhal. 2 nights later, a guard was found dead near the tower. Throat slit. No coin, no tracks, just a feather left on his chest. Black, slick with blood. Robb's war council gathered that same night. The whispers of betrayal had returned, louder now, and when they searched Locke's tent the next morning, they found a hidden scroll with Lannister wax. Robb held it in his hand, jaw tight. "What does it say?" Arya asked from the shadows. Robb read it out loud. "Delay the young wolf. Poison if needed. Harrenhal must fall from within." Arya stepped forward. "Then let me help," she said. "I know how to kill quietly." Ned tried to speak to stop her, but Robb raised his hand. "Not yet," he said. "Let's see who else wears a lion's cloak under wolf's fur." But in the shadows of the broken towers, another figure listened. A man with no name, no past, and eyes like dying embers. "Jaqen Hagar," he whispered into the night. "A name must be given. A debt must be paid. And the walls of Harrenhal, ancient and broken, kept the secret for now." The raven came at dawn. Its feathers were grey instead of black, and the scroll tied to its leg carried a seal Robb had never seen before, a red lion's head with claws. When he broke it open, the message was short: "Harrenhal will burn. From within, prepare." Robb crushed the parchment in his fist. He already knew there was a traitor inside. But this wasn't just a warning. It was a threat. That morning he called a war council in the Great Hall. The air was cold and smelled of damp stone. Arya stood against one wall, silent but watchful. Ned was seated by the fire, his body weak but his eyes sharp. Roose Bolton, Brynden Tully, and the Greatjon gathered at the table. Robb spread the raven's message before them. This came at dawn. "Someone here is feeding information to Tywin." The room went quiet. The Greatjon slammed his fist on the table. "Say the word, boy, and we'll hang every man who even looks like a traitor." "That's exactly what Tywin wants," Robb said. "Fear, chaos, men turning on each other. I won't give him that satisfaction." Arya's eyes flickered to Roose Bolton. She didn't trust him. She could feel the cold in his voice every time he spoke. "What will you do?" Ned asked. Robb's voice was steel. "We set a trap." That night a false message was written and sealed with Robb's own wax. It spoke of his plan to march south toward the Reach, leaving Harrenhal nearly undefended. The message was planted in the war tent, easy for a spy to find. All Robb had to do was wait, but Harrenhal had its own games. At midnight, Arya moved quietly through the ruined corridors. She'd slipped from her room hours ago, a small blade in her hand. She wasn't supposed to be out, but she wasn't a child anymore. Not after everything she'd seen. She followed a pale man through the shadows. Locke, one of Bolton's men. He was heading toward the stables, carrying something under his cloak. She crept after him until he stopped beneath a broken archway. Then she saw him pull out a small vial. Poison. Her heart hammered. She thought of her father lying weak in his bed. She thought of her brother planning battles. She thought of Sansa, still trapped in King's Landing. Arya stepped from the shadows. "Drop it," Locke turned, surprised. "What are you doing here, little girl?" I said, "Drop it," he smirked. "Brave, aren't you?" She didn't flinch. "I'm Arya Stark of Winterfell." "And you're a dead man," Locke lunged. She ducked, slashing his leg with her blade. He cursed, stumbling. She darted back fast as a cat and threw a handful of ash from her pocket into his eyes. He roared, blind, swinging wildly, before he could recover. A shadow moved behind him, a hand, thin, pale, ringed with strange tattoos, closed around his throat. The man with the red and white hair whispered something Arya couldn't hear, and Locke dropped. Lifeless, Arya stared. "You," Jaqen H'ghar smiled faintly. "A girl gives a name. A man gives a death." He turned to go. Arya followed. "Why are you here?" "To balance debts." "What debts?" "The ones you don't even know you owe." He disappeared into the dark, leaving her alone with the body. By dawn, Robb had his proof. The traitor was dead. The vial was taken. The false message never left Harrenhal. But the cost of victory was clear. If Locke had been one spy, there were likely others. And Tywin Lannister would not stop. That morning, Arya sat before the fire, her hands trembling. Robb knelt beside her. "You shouldn't have been there," he said. "I saved you," she replied. Her voice was flat, hard. Robb looked at her, his heart heavy. "You're still a child." "No," Arya whispered. "I'm not." Far to the south, Tywin read the latest reports from his scouts. The spy had failed. Harrenhal still stood. The wolf had survived the trap, so Tywin set another. "Send Sir Gregor," he told his captains. "And send the fire." 2 days later, a scout returned to Harrenhal carrying a severed hand. It was nailed to a piece of wood, with a message burned into it. "The mountain is coming." And far beyond the wall, the cold winds grew stronger. Ravens died mid-flight. White shadows moved beneath the trees. War was only the beginning. Winter was waking. The sky turned black before the mountain came. Scouts reported flames in the distance, villages smoking, rivers clogged with charred bodies. And worse, the fire wasn't spreading naturally. It was controlled, deliberate. Someone was burning the land to smoke out the wolf. Robb stood atop Harrenhal's outer wall, jaw clenched, watching the smoke clouds rise like claws into the sky. Sir Brynden Blackfish joined him, face grim. "He's not just marching to kill," Brynden said. "He's coming to send a message," Robb nodded. "That's what monsters do." Gregor Clegane, the mountain, was no longer just a sword. Tywin had made him into a weapon, and now he rode with more than just men. He brought wildfire. Arya stood behind Robb, silent, hood up. When she looked out at the burning horizon, she didn't flinch. Her list had a name on it, and it had waited too long. "The mountain," she whispered. That night, Robb called every commander into the war hall. "We can't fight him in the open," said the great Jon. "The mountain has 2,000 men, and more fire than any of us want to see." Rose Bolton spoke calmly. "So we trap him. Harrenhal was built for siege. Let him come to us," Robb nodded. "We hold the gates. We draw them in. Then we strike from behind, like wolves." But as the men prepared for war, the walls of Harrenhal seemed to breathe. The stones groaned. Ravens screamed. And in the corners of the halls, Arya saw shadows flicker, even when there was no light. She knew something was coming. And not just the mountain. 3 nights later, the ground trembled. Arya was sharpening her blade in a quiet corridor when she heard the first horn. Boom! Boom! Then screams. Not from the walls, from inside the keep. She ran. Robb was already in the hall, sword in hand. Blood dripped from a fallen guard at his feet. "They're inside!" Someone shouted. Arya's heart froze. They hadn't broken the gates. They'd found a way beneath them. Fire erupted from the base of the tower as barrels of wildfire exploded. A section of the castle collapsed with a thunderous crash. Stone rained from the sky. The air filled with heat and ash. Then the mountain rode in, not through the front, but through the smoke. Gregor Clegane towered on a black horse, armor scorched and slick with gore, a massive sword in one hand. Fire trailing behind him, he cut through soldiers like wheat. One man he split from collarbone to hip. Another he grabbed by the throat and hurled into a wall. His men followed, fire throwers and killers, blades glowing green from wildfire heat. Robb met him at the center yard. Steel clashed. Sparks flew. The mountains swung like a storm. Robb moved like a shadow. Arya watched from the wall, fists clenched. Then she saw him, Jaqen Hagar, standing by a broken archway. "You want your name?" she said, stepping toward him. "I'll give it to you." He looked at her calmly. "A name must be given freely." Arya's eyes burned with rage. "Gregor Clegane," Jaqen blinked slowly. "That name is heavy." "Then carry it," she snapped. He nodded once and was gone. Below, the mountain roared, knocking Robb to the ground. He raised his sword to finish him when something flashed across the air. A needle-thin blade struck the mountain's exposed neck. He roared, turned. No one was there. His sword swung wildly, but his movements slowed. Blood sprayed. The blade had been dipped in something black and thick. Poison. Robb rose, drove his sword deep into Gregor's side. The mountain fell. He didn't scream. He just crumpled like stone and lay still. His men fled. The fire kept burning. The sky stayed black. And Arya, stark, stood on the edge of the tower, wind whipping her cloak, staring down at the body. "One name paid," she whispered, but inside her, something twisted. Not relief, not justice, just emptiness. The battle was over by dawn, dozens dead. Harrenhal half ruined again, but the north had held, and Robb Stark, bloodied and burned, stood in the courtyard as the sun broke through the smoke. Ned Stark was carried to safety. The maesters worked on the wounded. But something had changed. Arya no longer smiled. She no longer spoke much, and Robb, he looked at the horizon with eyes colder than winter. Far to the north, past the wall, the snows fell heavier, white shadows walked, and the first dead raven landed at Castle Black, frozen, eyes blue. The true war was waking. Snowflakes fell gently over Harrenhal, mixing with the soot and blood that stained the ruined castle walls. The fires had gone out days ago, but the smell of smoke clung to everything like a ghost. The mountain was dead, the siege broken, and yet no one felt like celebrating. Robb Stark stood in the middle of the courtyard, watching the snow settle on black stone. Grey wind paced beside him, growling low at nothing, as if sensing something neither man nor wolf could see. The war had changed. It wasn't about thrones anymore. Not really. Inside the keep, Arya sat by Ned's bedside, sharpening her blade. Her face was pale, her eyes empty. She had killed. She had named death. And death had listened. "You don't speak much anymore," Ned said softly, his voice thin but steady. "I have nothing to say," Arya replied without looking up. "You remind me of myself when I came back from the war. Harder, angrier." "I'm not angry," she said. Ned smiled, weakly. "Then you're lying." She finally looked at him. "The list is smaller now. And what happens when it's gone?" She didn't answer. That night, a raven came from the wall. Jon Snow's writing was hurried, marked with frost. White walkers spotted north of the Frostfangs. Rangers missing, dead things rising. Sam killed one with dragonglass. "Tell Robb, tell father. Winter is no longer coming. It's here." Robb read the message 3 times before he moved. He entered the hall where the northern lords were gathered. Some were drinking, others still being treated for wounds. But when he entered, silence fell. He tossed the scroll onto the war table. "This war we've been fighting?" he said. "It's not the real one." Rose Bolton raised an eyebrow. "You expect us to believe ghost stories from the wall?" "I don't expect it," Robb replied. "I know it. That's my brother writing." Jon wouldn't lie. The great Jon leaned forward. "So what do we do? March north and leave the south to the lions?" Robb looked them all in the eye. "We go north. All of us." Murmurs broke out instantly. Shouts, protests. Robb slammed his fist down. "Enough. Tywin Lannister wants to sit on a pile of ash. Let him. I will not sit here sharpening swords while the dead rise in the dark." Brynden Tully stood. "The North remembers. And it follows. One by one the others agreed, all except Rose Bolton. He sat silent, watching, waiting. That night Robb went to see his father one last time. "You can't come with us," he said. "You're still recovering." Ned looked older than ever. His strength was returning, but slowly. His eyes, though, had never been sharper. "You'll need someone in the south. Someone who still knows how to play the game." Robb smiled bitterly. "I'm done with that game." "You may be," Ned said, "but the game is never done with you." He pulled Robb close. "Take Arya. Take your men. Go north, defend our people." "I'll hold the Riverlands and speak for the north," Robb nodded. "And what if they come for you?" "Then let them," Ned said, a flicker of his old fire returning. "I've stared death in the face before. I'm not afraid to do it again." Arya came without question. She didn't even ask where they were going. When Robb told her, she simply said, "Good, I've got one last name to cross." They rode from Harrenhal under grey skies, snow swirling around them like ash. Thousands of Northmen followed. The Riverlords stayed behind to hold the southern lines. Winterfell banners flew again, high and proud. But the deeper north they rode, the colder it got. Ravens no longer flew past Moat Cailin. Wolves howled from empty woods. Villages once filled with fire and laughter were now quiet, doors broken, windows shattered. No bodies, just silence. At the wall Jon Snow waited, sword at his side, ghost growling in the snow. When he saw Robb, he didn't smile. He just said, "You came." Robb dismounted, walked forward, and embraced his brother. "Of course I did." Arya stood behind them, eyes scanning the woods. "Where are they?" she asked. Jon looked north. Everywhere. And that night from atop the wall, they saw them. Not thousands. Not yet, but enough. White shadows in the snow. Blue eyes glowing in the dark. No banners. No mercy, just winter and death. Robb turned to Jon. "So what now?" Jon tightened his grip on Longclaw. "Now we remember who we are." The Starks stood together finally. And in the face of death, they did not kneel. Because this was never about thrones. It was always about the living.